This week's episode of Die Hard on a Blank is brought to you by the London Action Film Festival, taking place in London from Wednesday, the 21st, to Sunday, the 25th of June this year. Last year's festival featured legendary figures from the film world, including John McTiernan, Simon West, and Corin Hardy, plus many more. This year's festival promises to be bigger and bolder. Tickets are available via the website londonactionfestival.com.
Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Cawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Under Siege.
It's Die Hard on a battleship. Phil, can we talk about how professional of a podcaster I am? Whilst you were doing that, I almost took a sip of my coffee, and then I was going to be like,
Your timing is immaculate, as always.
Timing. Almost as good as the timing as our friend Steven Seagal. The
Yes.
greatest actor.
One of the most technically gifted thespians in the history of cinema. First of all, what's your personal history with this bad boy?
You know, I've seen this is okay. For context, we've done 11 or 12 movies at this point. This is the one I almost didn't have to rewatch because I've seen it so many times. I don't know. I remember the first time I saw this movie with my dad on VHS. I remember my mom being in the room for the cake scene and feeling incredibly awkward. And then we owned it on VHS. This movie was on all the time. It was a Bill Billingham, my dad, favorite.
Yeah.
And then I remember it sort of started a bit of a love affair with Steven Seagal for him as an to be clear, as an actor in movies,
Right.
not as a human being, which
Not in real
might
life.
be some questionable. Anyway, but I remember we then went and saw On Deadly Ground in the movie theater together.
Did you sit through the entire film?
We sat through the whole thing.
Wow.
I mean, that's what you did. That nobody's leaving early. It was like an $8 summer movie kind of deal. And then we definitely saw Under Siege 2, Dark Territory, subtitle Eric Bogosian Forever together the night it opened. So it began a bit of a probably. I think my relationship with Steven Seagal coincided with the golden age of Steven Seagal, which was very
Which was
brief.
this movie?
Yeah, with this movie,
And that was
like,
it?
kind of a little bit after because he had a little bit of traction. But I don't think he's the reason this movie is.
No,
is good. What's yours?
This movie works in spite of Steven Seagal, in my opinion.
Though I think we'll get into it, but it might be his best performance by like a mile.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is what happens, I think, when you have a really muscular director that with a sure hand. And of course, they'd actually collaborated before on a real piece of shit called Above the Law from 1988, which is
a real
barely
piece
watchable.
of shit, raves Phil
I'm
Goddard.
just going to stop pulling punches. Like like you, I've had so little sleep
Wait, so
these
I got
days.
the line. I got the line.
I'm not pulling punches anymore.
So Above the Law,
Yeah.
which
now
was...
you probably your favorite movie of the last 30. It's the
Woo!
Citizen Kane. You believe you called it the Citizen Kane of action films. Is that correct?
I believe I did not call it that.
The Citizen Kane of action films.
It just is one. Essentially, those films are indistinguishable. Like about 4 films that he made prior to this one. Above the Law was the first one, which was directed by Andrew Davis, as was this movie. So a really good director. Marked for Death, Hard to
Justice.
Kill, Out for Justice, all ugly urban nightmares. Where
remember
he
the
plays characters
trailer.
with ridiculous names. Just doing, dull thuggery in these tedious slogs.
Right.
And I love action movies, and I cannot get through these films.
Marked for Death, I remember particularly seeming like it was like probably now would what then would have been edgy and is now probably like problematic culturally in a lot of ways. Like I just
Right.
remember, I remember my not watch. I've probably seen a few of those films, but I remember I don't know which one it is. But there's one I remember watching one with my dad where like he's driving along and these guys throw a bag out a window and the Steven Seagal opens the bag and there's a dog in it and like
Oh,
clearly the idea is
gosh.
that the dog's supposed to get run over or something and he saves the dog. But I remember my dad being like, "What is this?" Like,
That's
what's
what I'm
the-
talking
yeah.
about in terms of the tone of those movies are so oppressively bleak, and they kind of wallow in this ugly urban nihilism to the point that they're just not enjoyable movies to watch, in my opinion. Now, obviously, he's a skilled martial artist, and in his defense, you could say he has a kind of low key charisma, and he offered something new at that time, right? You had each of the iconic action stars at that time kind of had their own niche, their own brand. Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Willis. Van Damme was sort of new on the scene. Norris
Jackie
is kind
Chan.
of fading out. Jackie Chan. They all had a different kind of flavor and a different edge. And I guess he offered something that was unique at a time when action cinema was really popular, especially internationally.
Well, not to sound ridiculous, we've been making jokes about how he talks like this, but it's like there's a little bit of like, I'm not comparing it, but there's like a little bit of Clint Eastwood in some of the kind of like man with no name delivery, like very stoic. Not at all comparable in terms of quality, but you can sort of feel him doing the same level of like.
Well, he tries to
deadpan
he
acting.
kind of underplays, but there are certain
Yes.
actors that can underplay and still are magnetic, such as Clint Eastwood or
Correct.
James Spader, for example. I think of like someone that can whisper.
Welcome to Spadercast.
That
the
is something I
podcast
wanted.
where
Funny
Phil
you bring
Gordon-
that up. I want to talk. I actually have a pitch for you.
God. So there's this iguana,
let's move on.
right?
Yeah,
and he's friends
exactly.
with James Spader.
Exactly.
Uh,
I saw this as a rental as well, probably about 90. This came out in 92, maybe 92, 93. Had no relationship with Seagal, but no particular interest in him. Liked it, but didn't kind of like. It was like, yeah, it was fine. It was a little, I don't know, it was whatever. As the years have gone by, I've come back to it again and again and grown to absolutely love this movie, mainly because of the incredible villains and Andrew Davis's direction and various other things that
Yeah.
we'll talk about. But it isn't because of Seagal, even though, to be fair, he is. He works in this film.
He really does.
But
He does work in this movie.
It's the best. It's unquestionably the best. His best performance, the best thing that he's ever done by some distance.
If you haven't seen Under Siege, well, we're eight or 9 minutes in here, so like maybe you should watch Under Siege. I don't know what you're
But
doing.
why don't I put it in a little bit of context with
Why
our
don't we
top
do
line
some
fact
top
check?
line fact check about the film Under Siege?
So Under Siege was released by Warner Brothers in the US on October 9th, 1992, which was approximately 4 months after our last film, Patriot Games, which was released June 5th of that year. And 4 years after Die Hard, which of course came out in the summer of 1988. It was directed by Andrew Davis, produced by Arnon Milchan, Stephen Reuther, and Seagal himself. It stars Steven Seagal, Tommy Lee Jones, Gary Busey, and Erika Eleniak. Now, the film was a spec script written by J.F. Lawton that was originally titled Dreadnought, and it sold for $1 million. On an estimated budget of $35 million, this film grossed $156.6 million. Was it worth paying that writer $1 million in pre-tax, pre-commission money in 1992 to the guy that created, conceived, and crafted and researched this entire piece of work out of thin air for a film that then grossed $156.6 million? I would suggest that it was.
Yeah,
Wonder why I'm bringing that
I
up.
can't imagine. Phil, should we get into our Die Hard DNA?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, we should.
Our Die Hard DNA. Now, this is one of the best and earliest Die Hard on a blanks. Now, for all the Steven Seagal heads, or the Battleship heads, or the Andrew Davis heads who are discovering this podcast for the first time, what does the term Die Hard on a blank mean?
So Die Hard on a blank is cultural or industry shorthand for any film using this particular storytelling paradigm of bad guys take over a blank, a toilet, an ice cream factory.
An iguana store.
It's a classic Die Hard on a blank premise. In fact, Michael Wilmington's review in the LA Times described the film as Die Hard on a battleship, and that quote was later used in the marketing. So now that was literally being commodified and
It's like actually a term that people are using as a
exactly.
shorthand to be like, oh, it's Die Hard on a Die Hard on a toilet. I can't believe that was the first one you came up with.
So in this case, a group of mercenaries take over the USS Missouri battleship, and it's up to ex-Navy SEAL turned ship's cook Casey Ryback to stop them
Now-
with the help of Playboy playmate Jordan Tate.
Miss July 1989, which was actually Erika Eleniak's month in Playboy.
So there's a little meta thing going on
Thank you very much, Amazon X-ray notes,
Uh-huh.
for giving. I really like those X-ray notes. Those are really, really helpful. Not only, though, is he a cook, he's also a SEAL, which
Yes.
Gary Busey finds in his personal file. I love in an action movie when someone finds somebody's personal file midway through and they're like, this guy is actually the greatest hero who's ever lived.
But this was one of the first times, I think, where we had, like, now that's become such a trope, like he's an ex-Green Beret and he's an ex-Navy SEAL. This was actually one of the first films to have that, because McClane didn't have that backstory,
Which is what
right?
makes it distinguished in Die Hard, is
Right.
he's like an everyman. It's interesting, to track this, as we've been doing on this podcast, to see how these characters evolve away from the McClane model.
Yeah, this actually, it evolves it. It creates this idea of a guy kind of hiding in plain sight with a backstory that he has all of these elite skills. Other comparisons are he's an insubordinate hero, right? Who has a problem with authority. Again, very much like McClane. Notice how the terrorist attack in the middle of a party, featuring shitty red punch cocktails, which look delicious.
Do they look delicious? Or they
I
look
want to
like,
be at that
I
party.
have like a
even
headache.
if the terrorists did attack, I think it would still be quite a lot of fun.
Maybe. I'm a little concerned about I
like the bail
the
jumpers.
vibe on an all-male ship when there's like a Playboy model. Like it's just got
Yeah,
got a
that
stink
is-
on there. It just doesn't seem that appealing. Maybe
I was
I'm
going to come to the sexual politics, which have not aged great.
Would you think? But in another way,
We're like 50 years out of date at the time.
yeah, there's a lot of here's one move. What? There's some rough stuff in this.
It also plays with status and class, I think, in the same way. Like the high status characters are all jerks, but the lower status characters, sort of in the ship's galley, the kind of blue collar heroes, again, very much like Die Hard, how we've talked about how the quote unquote lower status characters in Die Hard are exalted by the end of the movie, such as
That's interesting.
the chauffeur, Al
Powell.
obviously McClane himself, and so forth.
Yeah, I've kind of forgotten watching this that he gets a little ragtag group together, like the guy who does I do laundry,
Right.
that guy, and then a few of the other sort of like non-commissioned officers
Yeah.
or whoever they
Yeah.
happen to be. To
So
to
there's
do
there's that kind of class politics sort of subtle aspect. The one exception being the ship's captain, J.T. Adams, who's played by Patrick O'Neill, who's kind of like the Takagi of this piece, right? He's noble, he's decent, he cares about his sort of subordinates. He even says like, "Oh, it's not for me, it's for the crew." He's actually quite attuned to them, and of course, he's one of the first ones killed, just like Takagi in Die Hard.
I did not. That's a good connection.
He's
to
also
him.
rocking the tank top. I don't know if you caught that one. He's rocking a green tank top.
That's right. He is wearing a green.
I mean,
tank top.
it goes on and on. Of course, Ryback's an expert improviser. He's using guerrilla tactics, improvised explosive devices. At one point, Tommy Lee Jones says, "Happy trails." Don't know if you caught that one.
I did not catch that. What is that?
It's when he fires the nukes towards the end. He flips
Oh,
the
that's
switch
right.
and says, "Happy trails."
God, I know we're Tommy Lee Jones in this movie.
We're gonna get there.
Woo! And also, this movie features Irish actor Cole Meany.
Yeah.
Last seen playing a British pilot in the saddest plane crash in the history of
Ill-fated
movies.
Windsor Flight 114, yeah.
Die Hard 2.
So we have some Die Hard 2 DNA. The other thing I was going to say about the last point on the Die Hard DNA that I thought was interesting was this film actually had a direct impact on the Die Hard franchise because it delayed production of a planned third Die Hard film.
How did that happen?
So there was a concept for Die Hard 3 at one point that was born out of another spec script called Troubleshooter, which was about a cruise ship taken over by terrorists. And ultimately that idea was deemed too similar to Under Siege, and the script underwent several rewrites before ultimately becoming Die Hard with a Vengeance. But Die Hard with a Vengeance does have some scenes on a ship.
Oh, it
if you
does.
think
That's
about it.
right.
So I don't know if they were like leftovers from
Well, you'd know better than me, but
we'll
it does
never know.
feel like the Die Hard scripts in particular, particularly the first three, I can't really speak to the 4 and 5, they're an amalgamation of a lot of different things, right? Like, Die Hard's based on a book, Die Hard 2 is also based on a
Yes.
book, and then Die Hard 3 was a spec script called Simon Says,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
that then kind of, and then
So
it clearly...
I think Die Hard 3 in particular is somewhat of a Frankenstein project, which kind of shows in the third act, which was heavily
Oh, I can't wait to
reshot.
talk about the third act
Yeah.
of that movie, because... Yeah, anyway.
So Under Siege, as well as being inspired by Die Hard, actually had a direct impact on the series itself.
Boy, you sure know a lot about Die Hard, Phil.
We do try to provide a service.
Speaking of knowing a lot about Die Hard, we should get into the anatomy of an action movie, which is a project of your own design where we compare the film Die Hard to the film that we're talking about on any given week of the show. And we have several tenets. We live in a twilight world that we use to compare these.
Do I need to start saying, but there are no friends at dusk? Or
Yeah. Oh, please, you have to start saying it. That's so good. Tenet. Okay, so the tenets for our anatomy of an action movie are the premise, the ticking clock, the heroes, the villains, the action, the category that we've added, the lady, which also plays in with the humor.
I feel like there should be some Tom Jones music playing every time that you say the lady.
The lady!
Like,
She's a
whoa. Can anyone do a bad Tom Jones?
Mike, quick little Tom Jones cover. Our producer
put you on the spot.
He's shaking his head. Oh, he's turning
Pipe
red.
in some Tom Jones.
Piping some. Whoa, she's a lady.
Very good.
That should be the song that plays when he kicks the cake.
Yeah. They missed a trick.
Okay, so very briefly.
The premise.
A group of mercenaries take over the USS Missouri, and it's up to ex-Navy SEAL and current chef Casey Ryback to stop them. Pretty good premise.
Great premise.
Great location.
Absolutely. Great production
Did
value.
they shoot on a battleship?
Yeah.
Like the whole movie?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, it's not a set. Those aren't sets.
They did it in Mobile, Alabama, I believe, is where it was shot. Have you ever been on a battleship? A real one?
Maybe like once in New York when it was like by the harbor, but no. I mean, I grew up in New England, so it was a lot of like, like old style ships, kind of like pilgrim ships or whatever. I didn't grow up with any of the military stuff. Have you?
There's the USS Iowa is moored down in San Pedro, not too far from
really?
us, which was an active World War II battleship. So I have been on it. I have a friend. My friend Adam is a real World War II buff, and we went down there together. He loves all that. He's a big history buff. And it's interesting going on them because they're so they're gigantic, but the actual quarters are so cramped.
Yeah.
Fantastic arena for cat and mouse mayhem.
Oh, we could do a whole
great
series
setup.
about ship and we kind of are ship and submarine movies and how how important that is to like making something feel real. And it's a real asset to this movie that it plays out in dark rooms that are really tight, and the gunfire sounds.
And the contrast of that and the sense of scale, is it's a great setup. It's a great concept and very well researched.
It looks really good.
Yeah, it looks magnificent. I mean, from the beginning, the word I was thinking of when I thought how this film begins with the music and those shots was like, this is a strident opening. This is a confident opening. They even managed to get that dolphin to do a little dive in front of the
great dolphin stunt work in this movie. Like, kind of amazing.
Kind of a hero of the movie.
Can you imagine now being like, we got to get a shot of the dolphin? I don't think any studio would be like, we're going to get a dolphin trainer for 3 seconds of the movie, but it really makes an impression.
Yeah,
like,
it's just such a cool beginning.
Which it's a great moment to shout out Andrew Davis, classic Chicago guy. This movie is filled with Chicago actors.
How's your Chicago accent?
Not good.
No?
Should I give it?
Da Bears.
Da Bears.
That's about
all
it,
his movies
right?
are Chicago, and he finds the most Chicago guys to be in all of his
couple
movies.
of them pop up. The guy who like wanders down and is like, "Okay, we got the Twinkies. Where's Miss July?" And then he gets shot.
And then they shoot him in the leg,
which I'm sort of happy about because he came across as a bit of an old grosso.
Yeah, he was a grosso. That's for sure.
But he's one of the cops in The Fugitive.
In the great. When I came home, there was a man in my house.
I think he might have been a real Chicago cop.
So he is, and just as a note, the other actor in that scene, whose name escapes me, is a great Chicago actor who plays the bartender in The Dark Knight years later, and that film shot in Chicago. So, like, I like that there are these character actors who probably are like well known in theater scenes there that like pop up for a few lines in action movies or films shot in Chicago or wherever it happens to be. This is like a good character actor movie.
It is. Those two guys who play the two cops who interrogate Harrison Ford in The Fugitive play almost identical characters, although they do have different names in The Package, which was Andrew Davis's film that he made before this from 1989 starring Gene Hackman, which is a great Cold War conspiracy
I like
thriller.
The Package. I haven't seen it in a long time.
I think it's a great movie. So the ticking clock in this film is an interesting one. Essentially, it's can Ryback and the accomplices that he's managed to wrangle together take out these terrorists before they launch the nukes that they're stealing. But one of the things that occurred to me that I thought was kind of interesting about this movie was it kind of bridges the gap between Die Hard and The Rock. A lot of the same beats are repeated, especially with the scenes where like the military command are debating how to respond.
Yeah.
And fun fact, one of the guys in the film who plays, when he goes, send Kate, send Ziggs.
Yeah.
Right? To go and get Seagal out
One
of
of
the
those
meat
guys
locker.
is in The Rock.
That's right.
Ziggs is in The Rock.
Yeah, he's General Peterson in The Rock.
Which
He's one
one's
of the
General
guys
Peterson?
who's like, they're debating whether to use the thermite plasma.
Yes.
But it's all the same stuff, basically. They're like, you're weighing up the cost of an airstrike against the lives of these hostages versus the calculus of missiles being fired on a civilian population. So and it's interesting that this film, it does kind of, it's almost like a stepping stone between Die Hard and The Rock. A lot of the same elements feature in The Rock.
Not to mention, it sort of bridges, and we can get into this when we talk about the heroes, like if Die Hard features like apolitical terrorists masquerading as political, this film features apolitical military figures masquerading kind of as political, but also kind of gonzo and absurdist, but disgruntled figures of the larger
almost
state,
sort of,
state apparatus.
We'll get into it in the villain thing, but they almost seem to have a kind of apocalyptic view of where they're almost at the point where they're just like, fuck it. It's
You
not
tried to kill me, you son of a bitch.
So welcome to the revolution. I was wondering, is it? Can we tap the mic in the way that he does?
You can do it. Yeah, you can do it. That's fine. That's nothing bad's gonna happen.
I
to
love
the
how
mic.
polite he is as well. Where he's like, Bill, this is Tom Breaker from the CIA. He's like, oh, hi, Tom.
Yeah, I love it.
He's amazing. But we'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Yeah, no, you're right.
We're
It's so
chomping at the
good.
bit to get to Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee. Okay.
He's incredible. Should we talk about the hero?
Let's talk about the hero.
That's not. I'm going too far with it now. It's gonna be.
hurt
Hang
your
on, give me one more.
voice.
Let me get another one.
Let's talk about the hero.
That's closer.
Yeah,
That's
pretty good.
closer. It's like a 4 instead of an 8.
One of the things I think is interesting about this performance and why it works better than his previous films is because Seagal is usually such a cold actor.
Yeah.
Right? But he has a bit of warmth in this one and even a bit of humor, especially in the earlier scenes.
With cue ball.
Yeah. By the way, hot take, can Cue Ball actually dance? Because I watched that scene closely this morning.
That's a weird
and
scene.
I could dance better than that.
Yeah,
and I'm a
I've seen
terrible
it.
dancer.
No, you're a really good dancer. Don't say that about yourself. I think you're great. No, that's a weird scene also because it sort of implies that maybe Seagal is like Cajun. He's kind of talking about like being from Louisiana a little bit, and like they didn't. There's no real dialogue in that scene. It's a strange scene where they're trying to.
It's almost like the Spielberg scenes of like E.T. of like, or dare I say it, Robert Altman of like overlapping improvised dialogue
you
from
say
an
that.
ensemble.
Yeah, but like that's
that's Andrew Davis's like. You feel like that's him kind of getting those guys to just like riff and have fun, and maybe like one of them was Cajun and they were taking a shot at him or whatever.
It does
right?
a lot for
it's
the
really
movie.
Good.
It does.
It's really effective.
And I think one thing it does is it establishes Ryback as like a man of the people.
Yes.
Like, he doesn't run. One of the things that it does a good job of is setting him in opposition to like the shitty commissioned officers who come down and are like,
Yeah.
Mr. Ryback, cut it out, or whatever.
Yeah.
like.
That was a phenomenal Glenn Moore shower.
Thank you so much. That guy, that's a classic. That guy.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, it does a good job of establishing him as that, and it creates this warmth, and the actors around him, Raymond Cruz
Yes,
especially, who will then appear as a special forces guy in every movie of the '90s.
Invented the man bun in
Invented
The Rock.
man. I don't know. Ooh, that's a good. Yeah, maybe he did. But there's this sort of like you like Seagal more because Davis, who we haven't shouted out enough, who really is great, puts actors around him who elevate Seagal, and he cuts reactions and gets things out of him as an actor that work really, really well. Originally, Seagal wanted to co-direct this movie with the
gosh.
director of Hard to Kill, whose name escapes me, and they got lucky that Andrew Davis did this movie because he's a real actor's director, I think.
He's brilliant. He's got a real sense for pacing, scale, imagery, actors. He's, no pun intended, but he's the whole package, right? And Andrew Davis, especially at this moment in his career, this was an interesting kind of Tommy Lee Jones trilogy of The Package, Under Siege, and The Fugitive.
Which may be one of the 10 greatest movies of the 90s.
and really helped turn Tommy Lee Jones from a phenomenal actor into a movie star.
Yeah.
So Andrew Day, and also he worked with a lot of the same actors again and again. He worked with Pam Grier a couple of times in Above the Law and the Package, those Chicago guys that we were talking about. Another actor, Eddie Bo Smith Jr., who plays a character called Shadow.
And he's the other fugitive in
he
The
plays
Fugitive.
Copeland in The Fugitive,
That's
the other shackled
brutal.
prisoner. He's got a little part in the package too.
Tragic
and he's in
storyline.
Chain Reaction as well.
Oh, Chain Reaction! I forgot about Chain Reaction.
So he clearly had a good affinity with actors. The other thing I think is interesting about Seagal in this movie versus his other films is I find that he often comes across in the blurring of lines between reality and fiction as a bully. In his films, he comes across as a bully, but in this film, he's more of an underdog. He's more likable. Like you're saying, he's kind of that manner, the people that kind of you hate to use this phrase, but like the common touch, as it were, that McClane has too in his interactions with Argyle, and we talked about how he interacts with the security guards in the lobby in Nakatomi Plaza. That just those kind of subtle details that say this is not a pretentious man.
There's a moment in this movie that I actually love, where he hands Jordan Tate a gun. And she says, "I hate guns," and he says, "I do too."
I wanted to talk to you about that.
And I think that that's a really crucial moment because it makes it. You've seen him like do a bunch of ridiculous Steven Seagal knife shit and shoot a few people, but like just the fact that he says that makes it like he delivers that line with a kind of Steven Seagal conviction that like gets away from his image as like badass Steven Seagal guy that really does a lot for making him like
I
a
love
sympathetic
that moment.
character. I think it's a great
It's
moment.
interesting that you picked up on that too, because I wanted to ask you about that because I thought that was very telling. We've talked about that. You were talking about a lot with the Liam Neeson thing of like the reluctant hero, right? The guy that doesn't want to use violence. Ironically,
Or Jack Ryan in Patriot Games.
Yeah,
is
they're
another good
not. They're
example
not
of
like gung ho about
Yeah.
it. Actually, they're the total opposite. It's like necessary.
And that's
in
a
the
Die Hard
circumstances.
thing. McClane doesn't want to, everything McClane does is in reaction to violence against him. He's not an aggressor, you
No,
know?
exactly.
Nor is Ryback, except when he punches Krill in the face
Right.
earlier in the film. But like, that dude hawks a loogie into
Right.
a soup. Screw him.
And he's clearly, provoking him, and it's. But again, he has a problem with authority, right?
Yeah.
Like,
But
it's a great character. It is a great
good
character.
And I want to pick up on that as a good transition into our villains conversation because there's, I think, from a screenwriting perspective, something in this movie that doesn't quite work, but like has a lot of potential, which is the dispatching of Krill. Peter Krill, played by Gary Busey, and just an absolute killer of a performance. He is so good in this movie. He's such a slimy piece of shit. But he's killed because he gets on the he's helping to repair the submarine that is going to offload the Tomahawk. They're going to offload the Tomahawk missiles to. And he's killed because Ryback and his team take control of the guns and they blow up the submarine. And that rules. But Peter Krill deserves the death that William Stranix, played by Tommy Lee Jones, gets, where he gets an eye full of thumb and a knife to the head in a bit of a weird, protracted death. I don't really, you know what I mean? And my issue is that I feel like the greater antagonism is between Stranix and
Krill
Ryback. They
and
never
Ryback.
meet
Yeah,
until
yeah.
the end of the
Yeah.
film. But crucially, they make eye contact, and Ryback goes, "I know you."
Yeah, they have a backstory.
And
yeah.
Stranix goes, and he's Tommy Lee Jones, great prop acting with that gun though. Like,
Yeah.
He goes like, "Yeah, it's been a long time." And then there's this exchange that's so interesting. That's like, we both know that the people in charge are full of shit. The difference is that you're crazy and I'm not. So there's this weird shared kind of like, we're regular guys kind of stuff in the movie. And I wish that is really interesting to me because I wonder what that says about if the movie addresses politics in any way, what that has to do. But it's this strange decision to suddenly, I think a screenwriter's need to be like, we need to create as quickly as we can an antagonism between these two guys. But it doesn't exist at any point.
Kind of comes
early
in
the
at
film.
the 11th hour. It's a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but What I did want to ask you, and I was going to bring this up later, but as we're talking about it now, and don't worry, we are going to get deep on Tommy Lee Jones' incredible performance. But while we're talking about this point of view of like the hint towards some kind of political dimension, there was one line that I was dying to ask you to unpack. So I'm just going to read this line, and I want you to interpret it and say what your thoughts are. Which is during that scene at the final confrontation between Tommy Lee Jones and Steven Seagal, who we learn have some kind of history as presumably special forces or black ops.
Tommy Lee Jones is
right?
like a
He's
classic CIA
guy.
spook would be the term.
So he's
that they
probably
would use,
worked
right?
with, Navy SEALs on different, different covert missions, right? And Seagal says to him, "You and I were puppets in the same sick play. We serve the same master. And he's a lunatic, and he's ungrateful, and there's nothing we can do about it. You and I, we're the same."
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier. Man,
What do you make of that?
so is it the president? Is it the United States? Is it
The military-industrial complex, right?
You know, so one thing I weirdly thought about with this movie is The Big Lebowski. And I know you just looked at me like I'm crazy, but the reason that I bring it up is that Tommy Lee Jones is 50 years old in this film. So in 1967, he's like 20, right?
Uh-huh.
But they're dressing him up in this leather jacket, biker, easy rider, sunglasses style. At one point in the film, he riffs Jimi Hendrix's now, 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 now. And very crucially, this movie has one of its few quote unquote needle drops is Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix. So I wonder, in The Big Lebowski, he's kind of this like disillusioned hippie from the late 60s. And that's really the only connection that I drew, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And there's a line in the film, I forget the actor, but the sort of like Tommy Lee Jones, Stranix's handler, at one point says, "What, do you want to relive the 60s?" And so it's like the 60s are often perceived of this moment in world history, but in American history of like things could have gone a couple different ways, right? There's like mass protests, 1968. There's this kind of like pushback against, the Vietnam War, and all these things are going to follow. And it's almost like, is Tommy Lee Jones a failed, sort of like a hippie who's gone in the complete opposite direction and like has found like, okay, fine, I can't live this hippie peace love lifestyle, so instead I'm gonna go serve the master that obliterated this possibility. Comes to find out I'm just a pawn in this game. They tried to kill me, right?
It's really, really interesting because it definitely does create this idea that he is like an echo or an aftershock of the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? Like, was he? It doesn't necessarily make sense that he was like a failed radical, though, because he would be a military or CIA guy. But he does say something like, I missed the 60s. Yeah. And I feel like if I had been there to make my contribution to it, everything would have been fine. Now, he might be saying that partly in jest
but
because
he's
screwing around with the Pentagon guys.
Well, he is screwing around with them.
He's fucking with them a little bit.
But he projects this counterculture thing a little bit, right? Like bikers and hippies, and he's not like a dude in a suit. He's not actually like what he is in many other movies, which is one of the most exciting things about Tommy Lee Jones' performance. He's dressed like in this style, it's like, I wish, like a failed hippie.
An aging rocker, kind of, right?
Yeah, an aging rocker is exactly. And he's in the band, but he's not the singer. He kind of like does a little bit of it, and there's a little bit of like a performance. Like he's very funny in those early scenes when he's like, "Which way do I go? This way, this way." But it's like, I mean, he wouldn't be a hippie, but he seems to want to project that. And it made me think about another thing about this movie, and bear with me here, which is this is what, 1992. Mm-hmm. So we're 3 years after the end of the Cold War, which is like, this is not breaking new ground in terms of how you can think about post-Cold War movies. There's great podcasts like Unclear and Present Danger that we've talked about. But like, this is after this so-called like end of history, right? The idea that the classic antagonisms between, Russia and the West are over, and like, who is our common enemy? Who are we fighting against, right? Very simple reading of that. But these two guys are kind of like, they serve a master and there's no more war. They're decommissioning these battleships.
Yes.
So like, Ryback and Stranix are mirror or opposites. They're both cynical. They're both non-believers, but one has chosen violence, and the other is like, I'm just gonna cook food, right? So it's this weird like post-Cold War action film about what do you do with soldiers that can't kill professionally anymore, or have outworn their use, which is why they decide to kill Stranix. It's really weird.
What's so interesting about that is that Andrew Davis's previous film, The Package that we talked about, is explicitly about the end of the Cold War and a détente between Russia and America and the de-escalation of nuclear conflict, and a few hardliners in the American military and the Russian military who are played by John Hurd and our man from Last Boy Scout, Chelsea Ross, who plays another like corrupt general, I think.
I got to go back and watch The Package. It's been
It's
a very
all
long
about
time.
that.
Yeah.
It's explicitly about a conspiracy to keep nuclear armament in place because of like John Hurd has a point of view at the end of the film where he's like, why do you think there has been peace? It's because of the threat of nuclear war keeps things in balance. And if we get rid of nuclear weapons, he basically makes a kind of weirdly cogent argument for it's insane, but kind of has a weird logic to it.
But the classic military,
so clearly Andrew Davis has some kind of attunement to these ideas, right? These films were made within 3 years, one back to back, that are about like disarmament and the consequences of it. And if you wanted to get really pretentious and Freudian about it, right? You're talking, this is a film with gigantic phallic guns, right? That it's being emasculated. Like these are sort of alpha guys, being emasculated and rendered surplus to requirements by their father figure, this mysterious father figure that he alludes to, the lunatic who's ungrateful.
Nobody gets to see the Wizard of Oz. Nobody. Like it's that it has that classical.
But this
kind
is what
of
you get when you get like a sort of in lesser hands. This could be just what it would be derisively referred to as a programmer, an action programmer, right? But because you have Andrew Davis at a point in his career where I think he's really interesting, incredible actors, and let's face it, a fucking phenomenal performance by Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, he's amazing in it.
There is basically, in my opinion, there's only Gruber above him in all of these kind of Die Hard on a Blank style films. This is the absolute best, other than Gruber the Goat.
Well, that's the good point, because I also think there's something similar in the so there's a lot to unpack there. The emasculation, the idea of like they no longer serve a master they understand or they believe in. The fact that he kind of like there's that classic scene that all these movies has to have where the terrorist states his demands, usually to aborted dudes in and again, the contrast. They're all in these military gear. The guy who is his handler is in this like expensive suit, smoking cigarettes, slicked back hair, like just a piece of shit. Maybe the dick of the movie.
He's in the nominees.
He's in the nominees. But you have this like almost gonzo electric Kool-Aid acid test, cuckoo's nest kind of like litany of absurdities, he says, that's making Krill and the other guys laugh. Like he's not actually asking for anything. His politics are like a weird manifesto of nothing.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting as a comparison to Gruber, because Gruber has a scene where he's like, we want our political... That was not... I'm sorry, take that back. But imagine Alan Rickman, Asian Dawn, or... and the other... Like, he mentioned some real...
I read about them in Time magazine.
I read about them in Time magazine.
He has the same actual flippancy about, like, where he's pretending to have some kind of, I guess like agenda, right?
Yeah.
He pretends to have a agenda, but he's also...
But it's an even more absurd agenda. There's no real...
And Tommy Lee Jones is sort of the same way, where he almost seems like someone that's... The other thing that I thought was interesting, just to sort of filter into this, which is I think Tommy Lee Jones, if you look, is playing this performance. His performance is imbued with the idea that this is a man who is slowly going insane.
Yes.
Have you noticed how he's constantly out of breath? And is like, he's actually going crazier and crazier as the film goes on. But I think he starts out, he's already crazy. Yeah. And once the plan gets foiled, he decides, fuck it, I'm actually going to fire nuclear weapons.
Well, he also loses his hearing 3/4 of the way into the movie.
And that's when he starts going for these crazy non sequiturs about like, all my life, Saturday morning cartoons, the best. Like, what's going on? It's amazing,
It
though.
really is
Because he's
amazing.
playing a guy that is like got elite skills, is very intelligent, has been trained, has a complex relationship with the U.S. government that built him.
And the complex,
where he
the yeah.
seems like on both sides of it. He's wearing a tie-dye T-shirt.
Yeah.
Right? Talk about the 60s and
Yeah.
the iconography, right? But yet he's a tool of that apparatus, and he seems almost at war with himself about it and is just lost.
Maybe a bit of a metaphor for being alive in the post-Cold War era as like someone who spent their career trying to do this. Like he represents like both sides of like America in the sense that he's like, you know, there's that whole like debate that is ridiculous, but like would Lebowski be a Trump guy now? Like this kind of idea of like the people that are like the flower childs of a previous generation have gone around the complete other way because there's this idea that without like a classical antagonism, East versus West, Russia versus America, whatever the case is, like how do people exist, right? Do nuclear weapons keep the world in order, right? Like as you said before. And like that's kind of the classic military movie argument that like without these weapons, like what's to stop these like what's to stop antagonisms? Like and that's a very richly explored subject, right? So it's like
also,
he's crazy, right?
An interesting precursor again to Ed Harris's character in The Rock, who I think is similarly at war with himself and his relationship to America. Someone that was that's slightly more clear because he's like a Marine general that has been very much by the book, very much part of that system. And then he's lost faith with that system, which actually comes up here, the idea of faith. And has turned on the country that he served so diligently for so long. So again, this is actually a very influential film within the canon of
This
of
also
action
comes
cinema.
up a little bit in Clear and Present Danger with Jack Clark, Willem Dafoe's character, leading these guys into battle and then being like to lead an illegal drug war and then being left to die. Like, and then there's the fact that Harrison Ford, who's kind of the like bureaucrat, has to take responsibility for it. Yeah, it's like a super resonant movie, and like. The most fascinating thing about this movie to me is Tommy Lee Jones's character. And I'm so glad you brought up that scene and quoted it directly because like that was the thing that I sat and thought about after. Like the whole time I was like, what? He's a weird enigma. It's interesting because then he would later play Two-Face in the Batman movies, which, you know, I actually kind of like Batman Forever, and one of the great things about it is Tommy Lee Jones is just like batshit craziness.
Well, people sort of forget as well that we think of Tommy Lee Jones, I think now a little bit culturally as this sort of, you know, gruff, dour, very serious actor, but you forget that he has had an incredible gift for comedy.
Yeah.
Actually, he's hilarious in The Fugitive.
I don't care.
He's so funny in The Fugitive. And then, of course, Men in Black and all the rest of it. But I would say for actors as well, like, watch this performance because there is not one line or moment that he doesn't make interesting.
No, I agree.
Even the way he says, like, well done.
Yeah.
When he gets the things working, he doesn't even a line like that is totally perfunctory and generic. He finds a way to make it interesting. When he realizes that the strike team are coming in, the SEAL team, and he's like on the phone with someone else, he's like, strike team. Like it's like he's not even worried about the fact that there's a Navy SEAL team heading inbound. He's like busy making his deal to sell the nukes. It's like an afterthought. He makes fascinating offbeat choices in every single moment. Even when he's first introduced on the Chinook that's coming in and he's next to Erika Eleniak, he's falling asleep.
I think he's pretending to fall asleep.
And she to sort of lech on her a bit and she shoves him off. But even moments like that where it's like where nothing is happening, he finds a little bit of texture, a little choice to make, and because if you do that enough times, then that's what creates an extraordinary, like, such a larger-than-life, effervescent performance, which contrasts brilliantly against the non-performance of Steven Seagal, who's the complete opposite, right?
And in the middle, we have, giving a straight-laced dick performance, God bless him, Gary Busey as Peter Krill. This is a great Gary Busey performance also. I mean,
Incredible.
Gary Busey has already established himself in the Action Movie Hall of Fame with his performance as Mr. Joshua. It's goddamn Christmas in Lethal Weapon. But, like, you know, I don't know that Gary Busey also a bit of a weird figure, but I don't know that he gets enough credit for what he does in these movies because he knows exactly what he has to do. He knows exactly how to play it. One of the great reveals in this movie, and I don't know that this is like particularly like great in 2023, is him dressed as drag, and like
it's a genius moment
it's such
in the
a
context
genius
of the
moment,
film
and
because it's so unexpected and
it's
disarming.
bizarre, right?
Because you see him as this like like, okay, he's just a prick,
right?
He's one of the brass. He doesn't get on with Seagal. We've seen him in other movies being this kind of guy, and then when he comes out in drag, it's so like disarming and
it's an absurd
bizarre.
drag. Yeah, he's like, we're going to see the captain now,
and it's like, wow, these guys, they're two lunatics.
Yeah, and they have such
their
charisma,
their chemistry
crazy
together.
Chemistry.
Yeah, when you get two guys like that are just firing on all cylinders, that's why this movie works, because Seagal isn't particularly a charismatic actor.
Yeah,
but if you have that kind of firepower offset, that's why Andrew Davis, I think, as like a cook, if you like to use the parlance of our times, to use the to use the Casey Ryback reference, if he's making this
stew, this gumbo, this bouillabaisse,
this bouillabaisse, he knows the right
base.
that you need, that right combination
right.
In that recipe. And if you have an actor like Seagal that comes across as cold and one note and doesn't give you a lot, you have to balance it with extraordinary effervescent
Well, I'll go
villains.
even further to say that, like, sometimes villains in movies can come off as just one note, one dimensional, right? And like kind of just like, we're bad guys. And it's not interesting. It's never, ever, interesting.
That's what it's like in all Seagal's other movies that preceded this, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, it's having a director who also knows how to cast and knows how to find the right kind of vibe. Yeah, you're right. It's a great. They do a great job of compensating for Seagal's, let's say, limitations.
So, can we play my favorite game? Who's your favorite terrorist?
I thought it was going to be like getting on a helicopter or something.
Who's your favorite terrorist?
Who's your favorite terrorist?
We've got
welcome to Who's Your Favorite Terrorist Pod, a podcast within a podcast.
We've got Dharma.
Who's Dharma?
Played by Colm Meaney.
Oh,
We've
you're
got,
incredible, Ryback. Pew pew pew. Just goes right over. It's great.
We've got Mr. Pitt, who is our Theo equivalent, the hacker. For our British listeners, I like to think of Mr. Pitt as a nefarious Sid Little. That will fly over the heads of most Americans.
Good, that's good.
But if you remember Little and Large, that's how I see old Mr. Pitt. We've got Cates and Ziggs, the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of this saga, the two mercenaries sent to kill Private Nash.
Say what you will about this podcast, but we're the only guys making a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern reference to the 1992 film Under Siege. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's very good.
That's what we do.
I like that.
And then we've got Eddie Bo Smith Jr. as Shadow.
None are terribly memorable. I'm gonna go with the obvious choice, which is Stranix, Tommy Lee Jones. Can I pick him?
No,
I can't. Okay, so never mind. Take it back.
Absolutely not.
All right.
No, of your henchies.
Of your henchies. I'm gonna go with. I kind of want to go with Ziggs now because I like the Rosencrantz.
Ziggs is a great name as
well.
That's
a good name.
Like
That's
send
actually
Cates, send Ziggs.
That's my new nickname.
Anytime there's some kind of errand required now, I
Send
want to say
Ziggs,
that
send Cates.
Something about that.
Just start saying it to your son. You'd be like, all right, Ziggs, get to work.
You have to go and get some milk. Send Cates, send Ziggs.
I'm going to go with Shadow.
Okay.
Because I think that guy makes an impression in everything he does.
Yeah.
He's a very good actor and doesn't get enough
credit. The bit where like someone tries to attack him.
Yeah.
One of the sailors actually has a gun and he just like shoves him off. He's like, fuck.
Yeah.
And then just blows him away. It's so like believable.
Right.
And then that Tommy Lee Jones carefully takes aim and shoots the next man.
Let this be a lesson to you, gentlemen. If you fall out of line, we will kill you and the man next to you. It's so good.
Now move out of here in an orderly fashion.
It's so good.
Now!
Now!
It's so good.
Sorry about your ears, guys.
So
Wait, who's your pick?
Mr. Pitt.
Okay, all right.
I'm just into his weird vibe.
So weird.
I did it. I'm into him.
Yeah, this little sexual little vibe in there with that guy. He's like, ooh, I figured out the system.
Yeah.
I did it.
He's got a cool creeper
I also
aspect.
like when Tommy Lee Jones, when Stranix pulls the gun and puts it in his face when he can't figure out the problem.
Yeah.
I think that's a chilling moment.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really good. I like it when the terrorist turns on their... The Rock is a great example of that.
Yeah.
When we took this job,
best.
we became mercenaries.
That's the best version of that.
Yeah. It's David
that
Morse.
beat.
David Morse.
Wait till we get there.
Oh, man.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah.
The action.
This is an action movie podcast, not a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern referencing end of history podcast. We're going to this you know, good action in this movie.
Excellent.
It's very fleet-footed moves. Davis knows how to cut. He knows how to deliver.
He knows how
This
to
is what they're
shoot
doing.
action.
Yes, he does.
You know, there's a number of fantastic sequences. I'm a big fan of the old, who is the highest ranking officer in this room?
What's that guy's name?
The guy that he shoots?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I just love, it's a pleasure to meet you, Commander.
Oh, yeah.
When he
Green,
blows-
I think.
Yeah, and he just blows him away.
That's such a great moment.
And they pull the guns out from under the trays.
Yep.
It's good stuff.
Even the other thing I think is important about this, again, it's sort of like the idea of, William Friedkin once said, shooting a car chase is kind of like knitting, right? In that each sort of, whatever you call it, each stroke, each, I don't know what the thread.
Yeah.
It's
Very precise.
There's a precision to it, but there's a sort of almost a tediousness to it because you have to make each tiny individual component good. And in the same way, that's what we're talking about with like Tommy Lee Jones. But if it's the accumulation of 167 brilliant tiny choices creates this larger tapestry. I think in the same way that the little action beats, like the way that when Busey and Meanie go in and kill the captain, the way Meanie kills the guard and then closes the door with his leg, like while holding, I think he's holding like a silver platter or something. It's really slick. So if you make every beat like that, if you put that kind of care and attention into all these different beats, then the cumulative effect is what you get, right? Which is a really expertly crafted action movie.
And also this movie not that this is the key, but this movie runs an hour and 42 minutes. And I think God bless it for that. But also it's lean and like the action never outstays its welcome.
Yeah.
It's very functional, but not in a way that I'm like, okay, it's fine or whatever. Like it always feels good. Like there's a shootout towards the end of the film. Not the end, but close to the end when Seagal is like sitting on the ground shooting through the passageways, and he gets a call from the military command.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And like this, it's really cheesy. But Eric Eleni is like, he's in a gun battle right now. I'm gonna take a message.
I love that.
And then it's good. And then they give him the phone, and like it's just witty and funny, and you don't sacrifice the action when he's kind of like, yes, sir. I think It does. There's like a comedy to the action. The action never feels like overblown or ridiculous. It's just like.
Well, there's a
Well
couple
done.
of other stunts that one in particular I think is really spectacular. The bit where he blows up the Chinook helicopter and then jumps off the ship.
Very much a Die Hard. Feels a lot like Die
very
Hard.
much. Yeah,
The
absolutely.
roof of Nakatomi
Absolutely.
kind of vibe. Yeah.
And then, of course, firing the battleship's giant 16-inch guns.
Yeah.
And there's some really, really great stuff in it. But the one thing, and you brought this up earlier, I think the action is excellent throughout the entire film, with one exception, which you touched on earlier, which was really the only disappointment for me was Tommy Lee Jones as William Stranix. His death, which to me was really blunt and inelegant. You know, they have this fight. We learn at the last second that they have a kind of backstory. Okay, it's kind of cool. Like,
Yeah.
But it would have been great to have it seeded a little earlier so that had a bit more resonance. They have this exchange where Tommy Lee Jones is phenomenal, and ends with him saying like, there's one difference between us when Seagal's basically tried to say that we're the same, which is you have faith, I don't.
That's what it is, right.
Then it leads to a knife fight, and he just ends up defeating him in a knife fight and sticking the knife in his head.
Brutal. It's a brutal death.
And then the line is "Keep the faith, Stranix," right? Which I also think was an ADR'd line because
definitely
you don't
ADR'd.
see Seagal say that
They added
line,
it in
right?
post, yep.
And it's just anticlimactic. It's an anticlimactic afterthought for such an incredible, vivid villain.
Yeah.
Look at Gruber's death for how it's done,
Yeah.
right? It just deserved something more. Now, Krill, I think, does get an amazing death because of
Yeah.
you've kind of
Except
Chekhov's
it's not
guns,
person-
right? Writ large.
Yeah, Chekhov's guns. Very good. Very good. All right, so that's
Chekhov's
just to be clear.
16-inch guns.
Just to be clear, we have a Chekhov reference and a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
By the way, you know
we
when
gotta
they,
get some Henrik Ibsen in here, and we'll be really good to go.
Speaking of non-secateurs, you know when they load I guess it's the gunpowder into
Yeah.
those giant things? That to me looks like a delicious marshmallow.
Marshmallow?
Yes!
Yes, yeah.
That's why we're doing the pod together. we're on some
Or you're
weird
like, oh no, it's the
wavelength.
Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
They look like
marshmallows. Yeah, they do look like delicious marshmallows that we could eat. It is inelegant. I'm gonna push
A
back.
shame, though.
It's a shame.
They could have done something.
I'm gonna push back on the Krill thing because Krill is kind of the Carl of this movie. Meaning he's the second in command. He's a little bit like the Lethal Weapon 2 guy who's really the person that Briggs has beef with, you know.
Can I do diplomatic immunity?
It's just been revoked. But you're right. It's a little inelegant. I remember watching this movie with my dad and him having a visceral reaction to 3 moments. One is when he pushes the guy under the blade and it cuts his, shoulder.
I can't watch
It's
that.
awful.
Can't watch
and when
that.
he rips the guy's throat out. I just don't know if we need the throat rip.
Which bit's that?
There's a bit early. He like knocks the guy over and pulls his throat out.
He Daltons him?
He Daltons him. Yeah, there's a
didn't
Dalton
notice. I didn't
moment. Oh
catch
yeah,
that.
it's awful. It's because he's and it makes no sense because I know we've talked about this is also the podcast where we talked about it best possible, but it's like an increasingly shocking kind of violent movie throughout in my mind. But I'm shocked you haven't noticed this. It really sticks out in my head. It's pretty soon before. It's when he's dispatching all the terrorists on the way. It's like the part of the movie that I think almost gets like a video game where it's like he's just moving through and dispatching terrorists.
That is a great sequence where he's like crossing his arms and firing in 2 different directions. I'd never seen that
that's
before.
like classic action movie stuff, right? But
But
you're right,
I've never seen it
that,
before.
yeah.
I think it's probably done a lot now.
John Woo was like, God damn it! That was my idea. Just machine guns.
I can hear the sound of Tom Jones' voice drifting over the valleys.
She's a lady. The lady
Shall we
in
talk
question,
about the leading lady of this
Erica
picture?
Eleniak as Jordan Tate.
I have a hot take if you want to hear it.
I think I might have the same hot take.
Okay.
What is your hot take?
My hot take is that Erica Eleniak is a low-key comedic genius
She's
in this movie.
Great in this movie.
I think she's doing something really kind of brilliant with a thankless sexist part.
She transcends the role.
I think she is really, really doing some really clever, witty, really deft stuff. This is a movie that totally objectifies her. You know, it's really gross. It was not acceptable at the time. I actually remember, especially because my mum being, pretty staunch feminist and kind of
My mom was
instilling,
grossed out by this.
these
Yeah.
kind of values in me that even at like what I was maybe 12 when this movie came out, whatever, even then I was kind of feeling like this is kind of like tacky and,
But she manages to so there's a sequence early in the film where she gets off the boat and she looks incredible, right? Like and she's dressed all in black and like she's done up, but and the guys are all looking at her and they're hooting and hollering and being gross and like Krill is all over her. He's got his hands on his arms. And to her credit, and maybe to her credit, and I think probably to the credit of Andrew Davis, it's not like she's like into it.
She's revulsed by it.
She's revulsed. She wants to get away. And she then goes and gets some like pills for nausea, I think it is.
Right.
And she's like, I'm gonna take a bunch of these. Like she's clearly like, like I don't want to be doing this. And then she ends up being one of the more like interesting characters throughout the film. She increasingly becomes a badass. She like loads the Uzi for the laundry guy at one point. She takes out Cole Meany.
Yes.
I think she's really good in the movie.
I do too. And there's this interesting meta thing going on because her character is constantly referenced as being Miss July 1989, which she actually was in real life. And of course, she was in Baywatch, very objectifying show. But she says these lines that where she says I'm an actress. I did a Hunter episode and a Wet and Wild video. And she's like giving it's like really clever.
And it's well delivered.
Yeah. And and that bit where she says actually I have 2 rules. 1, I don't date musicians, and 2, I don't kill people.
And he says pretty soon you're going to be dating musicians after she takes
and
Cole
she's
Meany
just she's got a real gift for comedy. It's a shame we didn't see more of her. She did make that movie, which is unfortunately isn't good, called
Which one?
Chasers.
Oh, I don't remember that,
Tom Berenger and William McNamara, which was also sort of a Navy set thing. It was a bit like that, The Last Detail.
It's shocking that the name Tom Berenger has just been said for the first time on this podcast.
No, it hasn't. We had a whole chat about him on a previous episode.
Which one?
I can't remember, but we were talking about Costa Gavras, and then I was talking about Betrayed, and then we got into Sniper, and then we got into Inception, and we went down a whole Behringer rabbit hole.
Listen, I'm a one-take wonder. Once these are recorded, I never think about them
You're
again.
just in a fugue state when we record.
I don't even know what's happening right now. I took a bunch of those nausea pills that she takes earlier in the film.
But shout out to, legitimately, I think she's great in this film.
Yeah, she's great. She's really, really good.
She
and
gives
like
a different energy that the film needs.
To the credit of her and maybe the movie, it knows there's a little bit, maybe there's not a little bit of like undercutting it, but she as a performer is undercutting what the movie is doing with
Exactly.
her. And that is really, really great.
I think it's actually quite, a subtly sophisticated piece of work in which most people would probably just like, it would bounce off them and just say, oh, she's a bimbo playing a bimbo.
It's very refreshing.
But she's not. She's satirizing that idea.
Mm-hmm.
She's way more intelligent.
She's never a wilted flower.
No.
I love the scene when he tries to lock her in the lock her in the locker, and she just loses her mind to get out, you know? And, you know, Seagal doesn't do her performance any favors because he reacts to her like she's a pest and a nuisance.
And he's very condescending.
He's very condescending.
And,
and rolling his eyes. Like, it's like there's a car phone line about the transmitter. It's just like
he's so patronizing.
He's very patronizing. And you know, there's ways to read that as what he's directed to do, but then there's also the like different choices could have been made in those moments.
And also that obviously, as you sort of mentioned earlier, him kissing her grabbing her like a piece of meat at the end of the film is my wife, who I've been trying to convince to watch this film for years, of course, wanders in and she's refused steadfastly.
Well, it's because you guys met on a battleship, so she doesn't...
But she wanders in at that moment where here's one move, and I'm like, oh, I'm never going to get her to watch this film.
The last few minutes of that movie are kind of like reshoots or added material, because it becomes very abrupt.
Yeah,
it ends on a mournful note of him over the captain's body.
Yeah,
which is really...
well, the only thing that's interesting about that is... he's in his dress whites, which he refused to wear at the start of the film because he doesn't really go in for pomp and ceremony. And of course, there's, you know, those dress whites always look great on screen.
Yeah.
You know, and it is an effective moment.
But there's a reading of that per our conversation earlier of him coming back into the fold
Absolutely.
then, which is, you know...
He's realized this is what he's built to do,
right?
And what he's really good at, and this is his raison d'etre. It's not to live as a cook, kind of, and not use these skills. He needs to use them in service of a higher calling. But he has already said that higher calling is an ungrateful lunatic. Complex movie. Not really, but we try and find complexities.
Welcome to Complex Movie, the podcast.
So there is humor in this film.
It's
I think
funny.
we've kind of talked about most of that already. Busey's, drag act.
We're going to see the captain now. It's bizarre. So weird.
Every single thing that Tommy Lee Jones says and does, I think, is hysterical.
Right.
Even Seagal, to be fair, has a couple of witty lines, like when the bit where he does the impression of Glenn Morshow, where he's like, "I guess we'll just see what we'll see.
We'll just see what we'll see,
won't we?"
No, and then he's really good in that moment.
He is.
And also he's kind of like, why is it that I'm quaking in my...
Yeah.
Why am I doing an Elvis impression? But yeah, like he's good. It's funny moments.
This is a funny
And what's
film.
important is the humor serves the function of engendering him to the crew who will later help him fight the terrorists.
Yeah, which is very McClane.
Very McClane. Speaking of McClane,
yes,
I'm just going to put on my navy whites.
Oh yeah, we'll put on our dress uniforms,
dress uniforms,
polish the buckles,
because it's time for the Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards, with your host Phil Gawthorne. What are our awards, Phil?
Our first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line, and the nominees are. I'm always a fan of this one. Wake up the president.
Yeah, that's really, really good.
Now, interesting that cat, the National Security Advisor Trenton, played by Dennis Lipscomb, on face value, you might think he's kind of a bit of a weaselly Dick of the Movie nominee, but actually, every single thing he says in this movie is on point.
Yeah.
He's totally correct about every single choice that he makes and
interesting.
every concern that he has. It's actually a really good
He's
performance.
slimy, too.
He comes across as slimy,
slimy.
but if you actually watch what he's saying and doing, he's on the money.
Yeah.
Another line I thought was great was where Jordan Tate says to him, says to Ryback, "You're not a cook," and he says, "Yeah, well, I also cook."
Yeah, that's a great
That was
line.
that's
a great line. Is that on the
beast.
list? Is that on the
That's
list?
on my
Okay.
that's on my list.
That's a good one. He delivers that really well.
Do I look like I need a psychological evaluation? Said by
I'll go
Krill
change,
while
yeah.
while he's half in drag.
Yeah.
And completely deranged, cigar in his mouth. I also really like that bit, it's a bit of the exchange where Strannik says, "You're a maniac drowning your own crew," and Krill goes, "They never liked me anyway."
Yeah. Oh,
and
brutal.
then Dharma goes, "I bet they fucking love you now."
That's good.
Fantastic.
That's good.
But I also had your line about "I told you I don't like guns,"
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of interesting. So those were my noms.
So the nominees, okay. I'm going to go with "Do I Look Like I Need a Psychological Evaluation?" Because that elicited a belly laugh from my dad every single time we watched the movie. So there's a little bit of like, that moment made me laugh.
It almost feels like that was a Busey improv. Like,
Yeah.
it may not have been, but it feels like he was just so in
What
sync
is-
with the vibe of this
What does
movie. At that
TLJ
point.
say back to him?
Not at all. Deadpan.
That's good.
Those two together, I mean, give them a sitcom.
What's your pick? Stranix and Krill, the sitcom.
I think, yeah, well, I also cook.
Yeah.
It's just like that kind of captures the essence of the movie.
It's a great
and the
underplay.
character.
That's a great example of his underplay
Yeah,
being
I love
really,
that
really
one.
strong.
Our next award is the Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. And the nominees are Tommy Lee Jones as William Strannik, Gary Busey as Commander Krill, Erica Eleniak as Jordan Tate, Colm Meaney as Dharma, and coming in from stage right, Dale Dye as Captain Garza.
That's a really interesting choice. Dale Dye is very good in this movie.
He's
He's
just like
he's good in everything.
Such
for those,
authority.
For those that don't know, Dale Dye is probably the preeminent military advisor and turned actor in modern Hollywood history. He ran the boot camp for the actors in Saving Private Ryan, famously. One of the things I think is so interesting about that, as a tangent, is that Matt Damon did not participate in that boot camp, so as to create tension between him and the actors in that film, and played, I believe, a big role in the military advising for Full Metal Jacket. Right? Wasn't he
I
involved
think he
with
might
them?
be in that as well.
He might be, yeah.
Yeah, important figure.
Yeah, and yeah, I think sort of quietly shaped a lot of the narratives around the military. Military films. I'm sure he was very heavily involved with Band of Brothers, the probably the most famous World War II series ever made about World War II. Who's your pick?
You saying you can't go for him, but it has to be Tommy Lee Jones.
Okay. No,
For
that's,
me.
Yeah. No, I get it. It just feels a little too like, of course it's Tommy Lee Jones. But I get it. I'm going with Erica Eleniak because I was sort of, I don't disagree with your pick. Oh, no tension on the podcast. Phil's leaving. Phil's walking out of the room. Erica Eleniak, because I was so refreshed by the take that she had on the film. Because I sort of turned it on last night being like, oh yeah, there's the whole Miss July thing.
Yeah.
And I found it a little like, I wouldn't say subversive, but it undercut what I expected it to be.
She's definitely a bit of a sort of a thief in the night. Tommy Lee Jones is like coming in guns blazing, where she could have kind of quietly sneaks off into the shadows with the film,
You know what else she is? She's a lady. whoa.
The only
she's
one
a
in the film
lady.
except for there's a lady in the Pentagon. So the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie.
Interesting. I'm curious to hear the nominees.
Well, my nominees, but please feel free to add.
will.
This is a democracy. Mr. Pitt. I did it. That was like Zed. Bring
Zed's
out
dead,
the
baby.
gimp. Mr. Pitt, as played by Richard Andrew Jones, a.k.a. Sid Little, the Stranix's bespectacled tech specialist. Tom Breaker, played by Nick Mancuso, the shady CIA director and Stranix's former boss. Tackman, played by Damien Chapa, who is the young sailor who repeatedly refers to Jordan Tate as Miss July instead of her actual name, despite having been introduced to her multiple times.
He's the laundry guy.
He's the laundry guy.
Yeah.
Those are my picks, but please feel free to add. If you want to throw Kates and Ziggs in there, or any of our other...
I think Tom Breaker.
Breaker.
Tom Breaker is the pick. He's
Yeah.
just a slimy, kind of nasty.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I think I got to go with him. This movie, I mean, and you can make an argument for Gary Busey, but it's too big of a part.
Yeah.
But he really is a huge dick.
Oh, yeah.
He's spitting in the soup. Who's the guy, the gentleman, the Robert, I don't like you, who's that dude?
Which
The dude who comes down early in the film. He might be the dick in the movie.
Ensign Taylor, played
Ensign
by
Taylor.
Glenn Morshower, who's the guy who with the ginger hair.
Yeah, the ginger
red
hair guy, yeah.
Yeah, that's who he's in every single military / action film made.
He might
from
be the
this
dick of
point
the
on.
movie, Ensign Taylor. He just sucks. He's just a slimy shit. He's kind of like the guy in Patriot Games who's like, we took him out. Like, there's just something crappy about, like...
He's just a bit of a bootlick, isn't he? And a bit
Yeah,
of
I don't
a-
like bootlickers, though,
yeah.
you know? The bootlickers don't have a point of view.
Yeah.
I don't like that. But I think, I also will go with the guy who's, the CIA or whatever NSA guy who's probably ran
Well, I think
counter-revolutionary operations in
yeah.
South America for 40 years.
He kind of seals it at the end when he's like, when the guy goes to him, if it all goes bad, we'll just blame it on the cook, and he's like, absolutely.
Yeah,
That
he
kinda
sucks.
kinda cinches
That
it.
guy's very good in this movie,
Yeah, Nick Mancuso's
Mancuso.
done some quite significant stuff in the 80s and
for
90s.
sure. Good actor.
Best Death, presented by Marco.
No more table! Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate.
By the end of this podcast, I'm going to be like,
Don't
hesitate. It's going to get longer.
You're not taking
and
your
longer.
own advice.
Yeah, exactly. We're just going to take it longer and longer and longer.
So I have a few lines. Again, feel free to throw them into the Bowie base. Who's the highest ranking officer in this room? That moment.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Commander Green.
That's a good one.
The bomb in the microwave.
The bomb in the
Put it on for 3.5 minutes. Stir
Doesn't
it.
make sense that it blows up the second they get down there.
Who cares?
It really bothered me. Anyway,
What did he put in it? What was that?
I don't know. I mean, probably some liquor, probably some alcohol. But is
Yeah,
there
I wonder-
alcohol allowed on? There has to be. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
well, definitely for that party.
Yeah.
I also love that bit where he goes with the booby-trapped hatch door. where
Yeah.
it's, stand fast! Do not pursue that man!
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I love that moment as well because that's character. Because Stranix is like he realizes these are SEAL team tactics.
Yeah.
Right, like setting up booby traps and
Yeah.
deploy- like because he's really aware of who this guy is and the kind of like skills it would have. So he's like that step ahead of the rest of the people. Like, don't follow him because they're setting up these IEDs.
Very quickly,
love that
we didn't
moment.
mention him, and I want to. Tom Hall, the actor who plays the
yes.
young guard who will
Private Nash?
Private Nash,
Yeah.
who plays a very significant role in The Fugitive
And
is-
U.S. Marshals.
And U.S. Marshals.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, U.S. Marshals. He's very, very good in this movie, and
Yeah,
like
very likable.
sort of an iconic '90s guy.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that guy, I like him.
Another Andrew Davis
regular,
staple,
just sort of like
yeah.
the Andrew Davis repertory actors.
Absolutely. Well, there's also the dropping the girder on the guy.
Ugh.
That was a fun one. And Busey being killed by the battleship's guns.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
one of my picks. Do you have your pick?
I think it's the guy that gets killed when his arm getting chopped off under the saw blade.
I
'cause
can't.
It's so vivid
oh,
and terrible.
oh.
Yeah, it's odd. Can you
that's
imagine
like Ricochet level? Like
that and
I
the
can't
throat
look at
rip
that.
out, which I need you to go back and
Okay.
and look at
reinvestigate.
again.
All right.
I think that even Stranix's death, though kind of rushed or whatever, is brutal. It's brutal.
I just wish there was something in either the line or the nature of the death, or ideally both, that meant something.
Yeah, sure.
You know, like keep the faith. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean,
It's-
and the idea was introduced 30 seconds earlier.
Well, that I was thinking, not to get into too much of a tangent,
Stupid.
it'd be really cool if earlier in the film they somehow connect Ryback with the people who are the military folks, so that he could be on the call with Stranix. So he could be like, Stranix, how do I know Stranix? Like we could get 2 or
That's
3
what I'm
lines
saying.
about like
Just a little bit of feathering in, a little bit of track
Yeah.
laid, so that finale would have a little bit more. Because that's so cool that they knew each other. and
Yeah,
it makes
but
sense.
they don't do anything about
It makes
it.
sense. It's just like, oh,
maybe
yeah.
maybe we should write like a 10-part prequel to Under Siege.
Maybe an AI should write it. Double Jeopardy! Question number 1. A few years after Under Siege, Steven Seagal played the role of Lieutenant Colonel Austin Travis in which Die Hard on a Plane action movie?
Come on. First of all, Austin Travis is such a stupid name.
Compared to Mason Storm, I think, which is one of his previous
That's your birth name, right?
characters'
Mason
names.
Storm. The film is The Executive Decision.
Question number 2. Quiz question number 2. Under Siege helmet Andrew Davis was once hired to direct an iconic Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, but was replaced as the director 2 weeks into filming. What 1987 Arnold movie was he supposed to direct? And there is a clue available. You can phone a friend. You can radio Al Powell.
Can I do one guess and then phone a friend?
Sure.
Is it Total Recall?
It is not.
Okay, phone a friend.
Okay. This satirical sci-fi action film was based on a novella by Stephen King.
Oh, The Running Man.
Yes.
Sorry, damn it. Oh, iconic.
You're on the right track with sci-fi action.
Is Running Man? I guess it is iconic. Yeah. I didn't know that Andrew Davis was going to do The Running Man.
So the legend goes they were $8 million over budget after 8 days filming. But Davis did make a number of key creative decisions.
$8 million?
Apparently, that's the legend. But Davis did hire Paula Abdul, Dweezil Zappa, Mick Fleetwood, and Richard Dawson. So he did kind of have like a significant impact on the final film. He would go on to later direct Arnold in Collateral Damage.
Oh, yeah,
many
that's
years
right.
later.
We got to do like an Andrew Davis pod.
Davis pod?
Davis pod?
All right. It's time for everybody's favorite convoluted corner. Corner. Question number 3. You're going to love this.
Okay.
Erika Eleniak appeared in 45 episodes of Baywatch between 1989 and 1992. Her character's surname has a very strong Die Hard connection. What was it?
You think I remember the names of characters on Baywatch?
Think about it. But there is a clue available. Al Powell is standing by.
All right, Al Powell.
The surname has Scottish origins.
I don't know.
She played a character called Shawnee McClane.
Oh my God.
Now, it's spelled M-C-C-L-A-I-N.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great podcast to do, but I have to retire. Retire? I have to retire from the podcast for not getting that one right. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
but I
fun
wasn't watching Baywatch for the characters, to be totally honest with you. Look, this is a good movie. This is a really good movie. I think
a great movie.
Its limitations
great
are
action movie.
overcome by just a great directing and acting.
Yeah.
From certain members of the cast.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good. Shout out to Andrew Davis.
Yeah.
Great filmmaker.
Yeah, I think underrated, actually. When we look, there's more depth than may meet the eye in some of these films. And highly recommend The Package as well.
Yeah, and also Andrew Davis directed The Fugitive.
Which we're coming to, which we're heading inexorably towards.
Really quickly, I only recently learned The Fugitive was started shooting in February and was released in late July of the same year. I don't know if you knew that. It was
fast.
3 months.
Yeah.
They shot it.
Wow.
Yeah. Like they were it was crazy fast. I wonder what the production. It seems like Andrew Davis can make a movie fast.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious what
Super
the
efficient.
pace
Yeah,
of
yeah.
this movie was. Yeah, I had a good time. I had a really great time watching this movie. I like action movies. You know what else I like? I think I'd like would be an action film festival, but I don't think there are any. So that's kind of disappointing.
That would be a shame. I wish there was an action festival in London.
I wish that London,
Wait a second.
city that I don't live in, had an
one
action.
of our staffers has just rushed in.
They ran it. Guys, I've been doing research for hours. There is a
They're
London
handing
Film
me a
Festival.
piece of paper.
Tell me
that
all
says
about
this.
it.
Okay. The London Action Festival will take place in London from Wednesday the 21st to Sunday the 25th of June of this year. Last year's festival featured legendary figures from the film world, including John McTiernan, Simon West, Con Air director, of course, amongst many others, Lara Croft, Corin Hardy, who's recently been working on Gangs of London, which has got some pretty incredible
That
action
show rules.
sequences
I
in it.
love that show.
Plus many more. This year's festival promises to be bigger and bolder. Tickets are available via the website londonactionfestival.com. So if you're an action movie fanatic like us and you live in striking distance of London, make your way to londonactionfestival.com and don't miss out on all the mayhem and madness.
I would like to apologize for Phil Gothorn for referencing Simon West and not referencing Gone in 60 Seconds. What kind of...
Well, I didn't reference that because it wasn't directed by Simon West.
Oh,
It's directed by Dominic Senna. But what do I know? Right.
no! I have to go again.
All right, you want to do the wrap up?
Let's wrap up the show. Listen, if you made it this far in and you like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern references in your action movie podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend, call your drama teacher who also happens to love Die Hard, and tell him to listen to the show. We're on Twitter. I'm at Liam G. Billingham. Phil, you still, well, are any of us still on Twitter? But are you still on Twitter these days?
Technically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all technically still on Twitter. What's your handle?
At Philip Gawthorne.
Oh, of course. How could, yeah.
There's nothing funny
It's
about
not
it.
at on a helicopter, unfortunately.
It's
Yeah. But you know what? You don't have to go on Twitter if you don't want to, for reasons that are totally understandable. We're also on Instagram at DieHardOAB, and you can email us at diehardoab@gmail.com. And if you see a helicopter in the sky over LA, it's probably Phil. So just wave it down, and he'll come down and he'll get you. Next time on the show,
Passenger 57.
starring the great, inimitable Wesley Snipes.
It's going to be a fun one, guys. Don't
Can't
miss
wait.
out.
Don't miss out. We'll be back next time with some new FBI guys, I guess.
Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.